Just make it stop. I'll bet you've had some version of those words racing through your mind, surging through your chest, and perhaps actually flying loose from your lips. Just make it stop. Traveling with young children, melting down on what is supposed to be your vacation. Maybe you received yet another contentious communication from someone in whom you were struggling to see the image of God. Just make it stop. The onslaught of news notifications about our roller coaster global economy, the impact of more extreme weather from climate change, the assassination and assassination attempts of elected officials, the erosion of civil rights and governmental norms, and the escalation of violence in the Middle East. Just make it stop. 20th century African American intellectual James Baldwin bemoaned, "I'm terrified at the moral apathy, the death of the heart, which is happening in my country. These people have deluded themselves for so long that they really don't think I'm human. And I base this on their conduct, not on what they say." Baldwin felt terror from his experience of his nation's compassion deficiency. This indifference or opposition to his humanity did not seem congruent with the ideals of the land of the free. This apathy was not based upon what people said they believed or felt towards the Black community, but about what they did or often did not do on behalf of the Black community. Baldwin decried the steadily increasing gap between our aspirations and our actualities. We fear our own soul, our own decency. Our collective work toward beloved community is being swallowed by that growing gap. The prophetic work of Isaiah is addressed to the nation of Judah as they are sliding toward exile, a nation of immense religious activity and voice, even as the least of these in their own community experienced a lack of action or advocacy on their behalf. There's a need not only to hear, but to heed the word of Yahweh. To listen to God's word with attention is to be drawn into it, to participate with it, to find our consciences awakened, our imaginations inspired, our hearts anchored to divine love, and our bodies mobilized. Isaiah speaks to a people living in Jerusalem during the time of the Assyrian threat. The Judeans thought of themselves as safe because they were in the city of David, the footstool of God, the place where the heavens and the earth met in the temple. Isaiah addresses a people clothed in their self-assurance and security in startling terms. Rulers of Sodom, people of Gomorrah, cities known for how the elite and powerful wielded privilege over the stranger and oppressed in their midst. The ancient cities of Sodom and Gomorrah committed the sin of violent assault to humiliate outsiders who wanted to have access to their way of life. They hazed violently, not unlike some athletic teams or collegiate fraternities or military units, exploiting power dynamics that emphasized themselves as privileged insiders. The huddled masses yearning for freedom likely longed for the opportunity for a new life and the prosperity the rich lands of Sodom and Gomorrah promised. Humiliation and dehumanization was the price of admittance as outsiders. Ezekiel 16 summed up the sin of Sodom as pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, while failing to aid the poor and needy. By linking the rulers of Jerusalem to those of Sodom and the people of Jerusalem to those of Gomorrah, Isaiah emphasizes the growing gap between their intentions as devout people of faith and the actual impact their piety has on the people of God. And those who scapegoat the LGBTQ community with the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah use their privilege not to aid the marginalized, but to pile misery upon us. Ironically, in so doing, they commit the sin of Sodom themselves by exploiting the vulnerable. Isaiah's prophetic word continues in verse 11 with a question about these multitudes of sacrifices, as if to say they keep piling up sacrificial carcasses while up to their knees in the bloodshed for their own violence. God indicates, this is for you, not for me. I take no pleasure, nor have any need for this violent scapegoating. This is a critique of the growing gap between how they ritualize their relationship with God while they trivialize their relationship to their neighbor. The prophetic case continues in verse 12, addressing their posture. They stride into God's sanctuary red-handed with the blood of those they have oppressed. The people trample God's way and subvert God's loving reign with scapegoating. When Isaiah asks, who asked this from you? Trample my courts no more. It is the temple personnel of the religious establishment who are indicted. They were exempt from temple taxes and benefited directly from the raising of them. Isaiah's question voices the frustration of the poor who are being taxed at the expense of their own well-being and basic necessities to provide a life of excess for the elite. As it was then, it is now, but by grace shall not always be. The prophet sniffs out the sin of the people in verse 13. It's as if God is saying, your sweet sacrificial aromas are rancid with duplicity. Your gifts come with strings of injustice attached. I can't sustain your solemn assemblies when your inaction spits on the least of these. The prophet is writing the Yelp review for their ceremonies in verse 14. Their pious parties pain God. They weigh God down as God seeks to endure them. The prophetic befuddlement continues in verse 15. The very ways they are reaching out to God remind God of their violent patterns. God cannot bear to watch as they hypocritically seek to love God while trampling God's children. The divine exasperation is coupled with an invitation in verse 16. Though we have hurt others and ourselves, though we have missed the mark of forming a beloved community of belonging, we do not have to stay lost. We are not consigned to be speeding down highways of hopelessness at ever-increasing velocity. We can begin again. Though our anxiety, shame, and resentment has given us a heavy foot on the accelerator, we can be recentered. We can ease off. We can slow down and turn around. No longer racing towards our mutually assured destruction. Now we are heading toward beloved community. As Isaiah puts it, we could use a good bathing. Perhaps our garments are due for some laundering because injustice and sin have saturated our being. We must come to terms that goodness, when it comes to God's dreams for our lives and community, and most especially as it was lived out and embodied in the person of Jesus, takes some learning. Verse 17 points to this. This does not give those with extra years in academia a leg up on goodness. Learning requires humility, communication, awareness of self and others, a willingness to question, a desire to get it right, not merely to argue someone into believing you were right. We are to learn to do good. This path of goodness is coupled with a pursuit of justice. Like chasing the end of a rainbow, pursuing justice is a task that can orient us toward a goal of God's love being made real, while also keeping that goal ever in front of us. It is a task for our whole life. To get us started, we are pointed to a trilogy of people in need of liberation: the oppressed, the orphan, and the widow. This is not to set those categories up as medalists in some sort of oppression Olympics. If our ego is trying to ground its identity and worth in being a super savior or a super victim, then we have gotten off course. The question is, how can we build a community for all of our flourishing? This question is ever before us. For me personally, I found this to be a challenging season in the church. Across the country, church attendance and giving seem on a steady decline. Collectively, we seem to be reeling from another bitterly divided election and from the political and social consequences of that election on our shared life. My own community recently said goodbye to its last founding pastor, and we are wondering what it will mean for us to dream again. I find all this driving me to more time in centering prayer, to buoy my soul and anchor my being to Christ's love. Oh, how I wish God's people would not scapegoat one another, hanging their fears, angers, and insecurities on their fellow brothers and sisters, and then lambasting them. As they seek to be protectors of the church, they become its judge, driving their siblings in faith away as well as the larger world, and often for the most trivial of misunderstandings that have become a holy war. Oh, that we could heed Isaiah's call to reason together, to allow Abba God to make our stained lives as fresh fallen snow, that we could learn to do good to one another, seeking justice, rescuing the oppressed, finding our own cause mutually tied to theirs, defending the orphan rather than wasting our days trying to orphan one another from belonging, and pleading for the widow rather than our own places of power. Like much of the Hebrew Bible, there is a promise of a fulfilling and flourishing outcome if we can do this. We are to learn to be peacemakers, not people who avoid conflict, nor those who rush into conflict from fear of a life of mutual vulnerability. Power over rather than power with is often born from anxiety of being overcome by people who seem so strange or estranged to us. The gap between their humanity and our own widens, and as it does, our view of God's radical love loses focus. So mistrust begets mistrust, scapegoating leads to more scapegoating, and soon we are devoured by our collective violence. True peacemaking refuses to lose sight of the image of God in our fellow human being, even as it keeps naming what is necessary for safety and well-being. Peacemaking resists injustice, as it also resists dehumanizing the unjust. This is indeed a lifelong learning experience. We will be tempted to give up when protest does not lead to an overwhelming political sea change overnight, or when the boycott continues beyond the fervor of our initial commitment. We will be tempted to not merely rest as resistance, but to retreat in resignation. This often leaves the most vulnerable alone to face what they cannot escape. It is always tempting to feel overwhelmed as an individual, rather than to recharge as our collective beloved community. And now is such a time. We are not being called to be performative, but to persist in learning to do good together. Not every test is pass or fail. It is often enough that we are on the circuitous road of learning marked by curiosity, empathy, and humility. It is a circuitous road because no matter our age, skills, experience, or degrees, we all have more to learn in regards to doing good. You've likely heard the one about the skeptic who cries out to the skies, "God, if you're out there, tell us what we should do. Don't leave us in this horrible mess." Back comes a voice. Feed the hungry. House the homeless. Establish justice. Live simply. Pray for your enemies. Forgive one another. As far as depends on you, work for peace. A bewildered and surprised skeptic sheepishly replies, "Just testing." And from the heavens a voice replies, "So am I." May we awaken to God's creative beauty all around us. May we allow the peace of the nonviolent, forgiving one to embrace us. And may we be animated by breath of life to bear witness to beloved community.